morning sun rose over a quiet southern town, the streets heavy with the echoes of a complicated past. The highway stretched ahead, flanked by weathered buildings and fields that bore silent witness to generations of struggle and change. Sparse traffic hummed along the road, the air thick with the weight of unspoken histories. Captain Darnell Hughes drove in silence, his thoughts as steady as the hum of his car engine. His neatly pressed uniform, adorned with medals that spoke of sacrifice and service, gleamed in the morning light. The duffel bags in the back seat bore witness to his long deployment. Homecoming always carried a bittersweet edge, a return to a country that didn't always respect the service he gave so willingly. Pulling into a rundown gas station on the edge of town, Darnell stepped out of his car. The station was quiet, save for the faint creak of a rusting sign swaying in the breeze. He moved with the disciplined grace of a soldier, his polished boots scuffing against the cracked pavement as he began refueling. In the distance, 2 patrol cars idled, their occupants watching with quiet intensity. Officer Brad Turner leaned against the driver's side door of his car, his expression hard and calculating. His partner, Officer Jake Simmons, sat behind the wheel, his posture less rigid but marked by unease. Turner narrowed his eyes, his gaze fixed on Darnell. "What do we have here?" he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Fancy uniform doesn't mean he belongs here." Simmons shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe he's just passing through," he offered, his voice tentative. Turner scoffed. "Or maybe he's up to no good. Let's find out." The 2 officers exited their vehicle, Turner's swagger unmistakable. Simmons followed, his steps hesitant. Darnell noticed their approach but remained calm. Years of military discipline had taught him the value of composure. As Turner and Simmons closed the distance, Darnell's gaze remained steady. "Morning, officers," Darnell greeted politely, his voice firm but respectful. Turner's lips curled into a smirk. "Morning. What brings you around here?" "Just fueling up before heading home," Darnell explained, reaching for his wallet. "I'm Captain Darnell Hughes, U.S. Army." He presented his military ID with practiced ease. Turner eyed the ID with barely concealed disdain. "Army, huh? That's supposed to impress me," he sneered. Darnell's expression remained neutral. "Just stating the facts, sir." Simmons glanced at the ID, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. His brother had served in the military. The sight of the uniform stirred conflicting emotions. Turner's grip tightened on the ID as he inspected it. "What are you doing in this part of town, Captain?" he pressed. "Just passing through," Darnell reiterated calmly. "No harm intended." Turner's tone grew sharper. "We'll see about that. Step away from the car." Simmons' brow furrowed. "Brad, maybe we should just let him go. He's got credentials." Turner shot him a glare. "You questioning me, Simmons?" Darnell's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Is there a problem, officer?" Turner took a step closer, invading Darnell's space. "You tell me. Fancy uniform doesn't mean you're above the law." Darnell met his gaze without flinching. "I'm well aware of the law, sir." The tension crackled in the air, thick and oppressive. Simmons shifted on his feet, clearly torn between loyalty to his partner and a growing sense of unease. Turner's voice dropped to a cold sneer. "People like you think you can just walk around like you own the place." Darnell's eyes hardened. "People like me?" Turner's smirk widened. "You know exactly what I mean." Simmons's voice wavered. "Brad, that's enough." Darnell took a steadying breath, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. "Dignity in the face of ignorance. Son, always." "I'm just trying to get home, officers," Darnell said evenly. "If there's no issue, I'll be on my way." Turner's knuckles whitened against the plastic of the ID. "We're not done here." Simmons stepped forward, his voice firmer this time. "Brad, come on. He's a soldier. Let's not do this." Turner's glare shifted to Simmons, But before he could respond, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" The officers and Darnell turned to see General Marshal Whitaker stepping out of a black SUV. Dressed in full uniform, his presence radiated authority. Whitaker's gaze swept over the scene, his expression hardening as he took in Turner's aggressive stance and Darnell's composed demeanor. "Captain Hughes," Whitaker addressed Darnell with respect. "Everything all right here?" Darnell's voice was steady. "Just a misunderstanding, sir." Whitaker's eyes narrowed at Turner. "Care to explain why you're detaining one of my officers?" Turner faltered. "He was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" Whitaker's tone was icy. "A decorated army officer fueling up his car is suspicious to you?" Simmons' voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't right," he admitted. Whitaker's gaze didn't waver. "This stops now," he commanded. "Captain Hughes, you're free to go, and thank you for your service." Darnell nodded respectfully. "Thank you, General." As Darnell walked back to his car, Whitaker's voice carried a weight of finality. "Officer Turner, we'll be having a conversation." Turner's bravado crumbled under Whitaker's glare. Simmons watched Darnell drive away, a flicker of guilt and resolve in his eyes. The air was heavy with unspoken truths, but one thing was clear: change was coming, and it started with moments like these. The street is quiet, save for the low hum of cars passing by. The evening light casts long shadows, and the air is heavy, as if the world is holding its breath. Darnell sits in his car, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. His uniform, neatly pressed and adorned with medals, glimmers faintly in the dying sunlight. He glances at the rearview mirror, his eyes sharp but tired, carrying the weight of years of service and more. Turner steps into the frame, his boots loud against the pavement. His eyes narrow as they land on Darnell's vehicle. He approaches with a confidence that quickly turns to aggression. "Step out of the vehicle," Turner commands, his voice rough, devoid of any civility. There's an undercurrent of suspicion in his tone, but it's not based on facts. Just an instinct, a bias, something rooted deeper than what he's willing to admit. Darnell doesn't flinch. His hands remain steady on the wheel as he meets Turner's gaze. He's used to this. Too used to it. "I'm sorry, officer, but is there a reason?" Darnell asks, his voice calm, even. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Years of military discipline have taught him to keep his composure in the face of hostility. Turner scoffs, his face tightening. "Don't get cute with me. We've got a stolen vehicle here, and you're the only one in it." "I haven't stolen anything," Darnell replies, his tone unwavering. "I'm just trying to get home after a long day." Turner's eyes flicker to Darnell's uniform, the medals glinting under the streetlight. His lips curl into a sneer, as if those honors meant nothing. "You think that gives you a pass? Step out of the car now." Darnell hesitates for only a moment before slowly opening the door. He doesn't want to escalate this. He doesn't want to give Turner more ammunition. But something inside him stirs. The humiliation, the unfairness of it. It weighs on him in ways he can't describe. Simmons stands off to the side, his hands gripping his belt loosely. He watches the exchange, his eyes flicking between Turner and Darnell. He knows this isn't right, but he's not sure what to do. His gaze lands on Darnell's uniform again, and a tightness forms in his chest. Turner leans in closer, his face inches from Darnell's. "You think you're above the law because you wore a uniform for a country that doesn't even care about you?" His voice drips with contempt. Darnell's jaw tightens, but he says nothing. He's been through worse. He's been on the front lines, saving lives under fire, fighting for a country that still sees him as less than. The irony is not lost on him. His thoughts flash back to a different time, a different place. The battlefield is chaotic. Gunfire and explosions echo around him. Darnell moves with precision, his mind focused, his body trained. A fellow soldier, pinned down, calls out for help. Without a second thought, Darnell dives forward, pulling his comrade to safety, narrowly avoiding a burst of gunfire. He doesn't hesitate, doesn't think about himself, only the mission, only the men beside him, the sacrifice, the courage. It's all meant to mean something, right? Take a deep breath, Darnell, he whispers to himself under his breath. Don't let him see you break. He straightens, looking Turner directly in the eyes. You don't know me, Darnell says quietly, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of years of sacrifice. And I didn't serve this country to be treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. Simmons shifts, his eyes lingering on Darnell's face. There's something in the way he speaks, the quiet strength that radiates from him. Simmons can't ignore the pang of guilt, the conflict rising in him. He thinks of his brother who served, who came home only to face disrespect, discrimination. His brother had shared stories of the same kind of treatment, but Simmons had brushed them off, thinking they were isolated incidents. Now, standing here, watching it happen right in front of him, it feels personal. Turner's voice breaks through the air again, rougher now, sharper. I'm calling for backup. You're resisting, and I'm done playing nice. Simmons steps back, his body tense. He knows the story Turner is about to spin, the same one he's seen countless times. Non-compliant suspect. It's a script. A lie. But Simmons stays silent, watching as Turner reaches for his radio. Darnell looks down at the ground for a moment, gathering his thoughts. A small crowd is beginning to form, people whispering, some pulling out their phones. His stomach tightens. This isn't just about him anymore. It's about everything. Everything he's fought for, everything his grandfather fought for, everything that's still so broken. The air crackles with tension as Turner reaches for his cuffs, his expression filled with authority and arrogance. Darnell stands there, muscles tight, his breath caught in his chest. He feels the injustice pressing on him, but his years of training keep him rooted. Every instinct in his body screams to resist, but he holds his ground, waiting for the inevitable. The moment seems to stretch forever, the weight of the situation nearly unbearable. Then, just as Turner's hand moves toward him, a commanding voice breaks through the oppressive silence. "Hold on there, officer!" General Marshal Whitaker's voice rings out, deep and unwavering. Turner's hand freezes, and the other officers too seem unsure of what to do. Whitaker steps out of his vehicle, the full force of his uniform and presence immediately commanding respect. His every step radiates authority. He's no ordinary man. He's a soldier, someone who's earned his place in the world, and the mere sight of him changes the energy of the moment. Turner glances at his fellow officers, his confidence faltering. His grip on the cuffs loosens, and for a moment, uncertainty fills his eyes. "Sir, I'm handling this." Turner tries to regain control, his voice shaky as he addresses Whitaker. "This man is being difficult." Whitaker, without a flicker of hesitation, steps toward Darnell, his gaze meeting his with understanding. For a brief moment, the world around them quiets, and Darnell feels the weight of his struggle, the years of being dismissed, evaporate under Whitaker's steady eyes. "Sergeant Darnell," Whitaker says, his voice soft but filled with the kind of respect Darnell has longed to hear. "I see you." Darnell blinks, a lump rising in his throat. The words hit him harder than he expected. "You see me?" "Yes." Whitaker answers, his voice firm, like the truth itself. "You've earned your place, Darnell. You've earned it with your service, your sacrifice." For the first time, Darnell feels a sense of validation, a recognition that has been denied to him for far too long. Whitaker turns to the officers, his voice changing, colder, more intense. "Explain to me how it's right to arrest a man who served this country, a man who fought for the very freedoms you claim to protect." His words land with the force of a cannon. Turner's bravado cracks. He stutters, struggling to find a reasonable response. "Sir, he was resisting." Whitaker cuts him off, his voice rising with anger. "Resisting what? The color of his skin? The audacity to exist without your approval?" The officers exchange uncomfortable glances, a sense of discomfort rippling through them. Turner's face flushes, but he can't find a way to justify the treatment of Darnell. His voice falters as he stumbles over his words, the courage he had moments ago now lost to doubt. Whitaker turns back to Darnell, his tone softening again, a quiet strength filling his voice. "I know what this feels like. Every day, men like us face a world that only sees the color of our skin, not the heart we carry inside. But we stand tall, even when they try to tear us down." Darnell's breath hitches. The words stir something deep inside him. His fists tighten, but it's not in anger, it's in the first spark of defiance he's felt in years. "I know what you mean," Darnell says quietly, his voice wavering at first but growing in strength. "It's not just about the skin. It's the way they look at you. Like you're less. Like you're not even human." Whitaker nods, his face a mixture of understanding and shared pain. "It's the small things that break us down. The slights, the assumptions. But you're not less, Darnell. You're not. You've proven yourself in ways they'll never understand." Darnell's heart races as Whitaker's words sink in, each one like a balm to a wound he's carried for so long. His shoulders straighten, the weight of the world on his back feeling just a little bit lighter. He looks around at the officers and the people who've been watching this whole ordeal. The silence that once suffocated him now feels different. It's not just about his fight. It's about the fight for every person who's been treated like less. The fight for dignity, for respect, for the right to exist freely in a world that constantly tries to define you by things you cannot control. And then Darnell speaks, his voice rising, no longer quiet or unsure. "I've been ashamed long enough," he says, each word solid and clear. "Ashamed of who I am, ashamed of what people think of me, but not anymore, not today." The words are a declaration, a reclaiming of his dignity, of his humanity. He stands, taller now, and even though the officers around him remain silent, something has shifted. The world is a little bit different. For the first time, Darnell speaks from a place of power, from a place of truth. "I've faced so much," he continues, his eyes meeting those of the officers who still stand, frozen in place. "But I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm not going to let their hate, their prejudice, define who I am." Whitaker stands behind him now, a pillar of support. But it's Darnell who has found his voice. He feels a surge of strength, something that has been dormant for far too long. "That's the sound of resilience," Whitaker says quietly, looking toward Turner. "You hear that, Turner? That's the sound of a man who knows his worth, no matter how hard the world tries to make him forget it." The officers, once filled with arrogance and certainty, now stand in stunned silence. Turner's eyes dart between Darnell and Whitaker, his pride crushed under the weight of truth. He opens his mouth to speak, but no words come out. The people, who had been quietly observing, begin to stir. Some are pulling out their phones, but it's not the footage that matters, it's the moment. The words that Darnell and Whitaker have spoken resonate deeply, stirring something in those who witnessed. Darnell's gaze shifts to the onlookers. He sees their faces, some hopeful, others skeptical, but all of them aware now, aware of the injustice, aware of the pain, but also aware of the possibility of change. "It has to change," Darnell says, quieter now, but with undeniable strength. "We have to change it. If we don't fight, nothing ever will." Whitaker stands beside him, his voice steady and strong. That's right, Darnell. You've got the power to change this. Don't ever forget that. Darnell meets his eyes, a flicker of hope in his own. Then let's do it together. And in that moment, the shift is complete. The world feels a little less heavy, the fight for justice a little more achievable. The battle against prejudice is far from over. But Darnell's courage, his unwavering belief in himself and in the power of change, becomes a beacon for others to follow. The officers stand in silence, unsure of how to proceed. But the power dynamic has shifted. The arrogance they once held has crumbled. The truth has been spoken, and for Darnell, it's not the end of the fight. It's the beginning of something new. Turner sits at his desk, staring at the paperwork in front of him, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The investigation is underway, and he can feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. No amount of justification can erase the actions that led to this moment. He clenches his jaw, trying to hold on to the pride that had once fueled his every decision. But now, it's all slipping away piece by piece. Across town, Officer Simmons walks into the break room, the space filled with a sense of unease. He's been quiet since the incident, trying to make sense of what he witnessed, what he failed to do in the moment. His thoughts weigh heavy on him, and as he pours his coffee, he feels the need to make it right. "Hey, Simmons," another officer calls. But Simmons doesn't respond. He's lost in thought, wrestling with the decision that's been gnawing at him since that day. His phone buzzes with a message from the union rep, a reminder to stay neutral. But something inside him shifts. He knows neutrality isn't enough anymore. The voice of inaction, the voice that told him to look away, is no longer acceptable. Without hesitation, Simmons picks up the phone and dials the number of the internal affairs officer. "I need to talk," Simmons says when the line picks up. "About Turner." The investigation moves swiftly, and soon Turner is facing the consequences of his actions. It's an uncomfortable process, one he resists with everything he has. He spent years believing the badge he wears gives him unquestionable power, but now, in the face of real accountability, that belief cracks. "Officer Turner, we have reviewed your actions," a senior officer says, voice cold as it cuts through the room. "You will be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation." Turner opens his mouth to protest, but the words die in his throat. The finality in the officer's tone leaves him with nothing to say, nothing to hide behind. As Turner leaves the room, Simmons stands at a distance watching him. His stomach twists with a mix of guilt and pride. He knows what he did was right, but it's still hard to shake the unease, the fear of how his fellow officers will perceive him. But he also knows he's done the right thing, and for the first time in a long while, he feels the weight of his badge with a new sense of responsibility. General Whitaker stands in the office of the police chief, his presence commanding the room. He's been a constant advocate for justice since the day he arrived, and now he's using every ounce of influence to ensure this incident is properly addressed. This goes beyond individual actions. Whitaker's voice resonates, strong and unyielding. "We are talking about a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. We must do better, or else we'll continue to see these incidents happen." The chief nods, but Whitaker can see the hesitation in his eyes. He's not naive. He knows real change won't happen overnight, but he's determined to push for it. "I expect a full report filed through official channels," Whitaker continues, his gaze piercing. "And I will be following up. You can't just sweep this under the rug." As Whitaker walks out of the building, he feels a glimmer of hope. He knows it's a long road ahead, but at least the wheels are turning. Change is possible, but only if people are willing to fight for it. Meanwhile, Darnell stands in front of a crowd at a local school, his heart pounding in his chest. The auditorium is filled with young faces, many of them familiar. He's been invited to speak, to share his story, and he feels both honored and overwhelmed. He looks around at the faces in the crowd, some eager to hear him, others unsure of what to expect. His voice wavers at first, but the moment he starts speaking, a weight lifts off his shoulders. It's as if he's been holding this story inside for far too long, and now it's finally being released into the world. Growing up, I was taught to be strong, Darnell says, his voice steadying with every word. But I was also taught to be invisible, to stay quiet, to accept things that were wrong because that's just how the world worked. He pauses, looking directly at the students in the front row. But I've learned something. I've learned that you don't have to stay quiet. You don't have to let anyone tell you who you are or what you're worth. You are the ones who can change the world. There's a pause in the room as Darnell's words sink in. And then, slowly, a ripple of applause starts. It's hesitant, at first, but then it builds, stronger, louder, until it's overwhelming. Darnell smiles, a sense of pride swelling within him. He never thought he would be the one to inspire others, but here he is. He continues, his words growing in strength with each sentence. We all have to be a part of the change. We can't just wait for someone else to fix it. If we want to live in a world where we're not judged by the color of our skin or the shape of our name, we have to make it happen, and it starts with us. As he finishes, the applause is deafening. He feels the weight of the moment. This is bigger than just him. This is about a movement, about creating the change he once thought was impossible. Simmons stands at a training seminar, looking around at his fellow officers. It's been a few months since the incident, and he's been attending diversity training initiatives, trying to unlearn the biases he had never questioned before. A speaker stands in front of him, talking about systemic racism in policing. Simmons listens closely, his mind racing. He can feel the shift happening within him. This isn't just about becoming a better officer, it's about becoming a better person. And while he knows he can never undo the past, he's determined to change his future. He raises his hand during the Q&A session. Do you think we, as officers, can make a real difference? Simmons asks, his voice full of earnestness. The speaker looks at him, nodding. You can, the speaker responds, but it starts with the willingness to confront the truth. You can't fix something if you don't admit it's broken. Simmons swallows, a realization settling in. It's not just about him anymore, it's about the work he has to do, the change he has to foster within himself and the community. And for the first time, Simmons believes it's possible. As the months pass, the town begins to heal. The meetings that once seemed so contentious now feel like a necessary part of the process. Darnell's advocacy has sparked something within the community, a collective desire to address the issues that have festered for so long. People begin to gather, not just to talk about what went wrong, but to figure out how to make it right. The local leaders meet to discuss police reforms, and community forums become a place for honest dialogue. The focus is not just on the past, but on the future, a future where everyone is treated with dignity, where equality isn't just a dream, but a reality. Darnell is invited to sit on panels, to speak with leaders, to continue advocating for justice. The ripple effect of his actions has spread, and the town is slowly changing brick by brick. Darnell stands before a crowd one last time at a town meeting, his speech ready, his heart full. He's seen the transformation in the community, the shifts in perspective, and while the work is far from over, there's a sense of hope in the air. The crowd is quieter now, more reflective. They've listened to his words, and now they're ready to act. We can't change everything overnight, Darnell says, his voice calm but resolute. But we can start. We can start with each of us, looking at ourselves and asking, what can I do to make this better? How can I be part of the solution? The crowd is silent for a moment, and then, one by one, people begin to stand, their applause steady, firm. And in that moment, Darnell knows. Change is possible. It doesn't happen all at once, but it happens when people come together, when they're willing to confront the truth and stand up for what's right. The road ahead won't be easy, but it will be worth it. The strength to create change lies in the hands of those who refuse to stay silent, those who are willing to fight for justice, no matter how long it takes.